In at number 10, we have the Crystal Wyvern. And why would you say that this is such a strong creature? Well, I wouldn't say this is going to be the creature which is going to be like the most buff creature out there, but considering how easy this thing is to get, its strength is absolutely insane. So in terms of taming method to strength ratio, it has to be on this list. And yes, it is still a wyvern, so it is still going to pack a huge punch, and considering its tame method being one of the easiest in the game, it really does have to be put on this list, and no other creature can really fit the number 10 spot in my opinion. This just has everything which you could really need out of a wyvern, and especially with the blood crystal wyvern, you have yourself an even better version of the original creature which we all know and love. And this really is a creature which should be hugely celebrated across every Ark player's journey, and I really do think that everyone should tame one of these things at some point, as long as you do have crystal isles, and that shouldn't be too much of a stretch considering it is a free DLC map. And these things are just so good and so easy to tame with that passive taming method that they really cannot be discounted on this list. Again, because of their taming method being so easy. Even like a raptor tame is harder than this, and look at how much stronger this thing is than the raptor. Next up, we have the rock drake, and this creature really does pack a punch when it comes to all of that damage. This is an insane creature when it comes to any kind of damage. It really does pack a punch in the mobility department, of course, but also in the damage department as well. And considering its mobility, it really is something special which you can't celebrate with every Ark creature out there, as there are loads of really great strong tames that don't have great mobility, and that really should be counted. Obviously, in this list, they aren't going to be fully counted, as some of the creatures further along do not have great mobility, but they are definitely a lot stronger than that creature in terms of damage, apart from the creature in the number 1 slot, which you may think is a bit of a surprise, but I really think considering all of its abilities, it is 100% worthy of that spot, and no other creature is as strong in it in those scenarios, those certain scenarios, of course, which are actually a very fundamental part of the Ark game. But back to the rock drake, this thing also has a very nice and interesting taming method, albeit not the easiest, but I do like a good challenge when it comes to taming any kind of creature, as I feel a huge sense of achievement once I've tamed it. I don't just want the easiest tames. The crystal wyvern is obviously an exception. That thing is just absolute gold, and it really does seem like an absolute cheat to have one of those things, considering how easy they are to tame, and you know how like powerful they actually are. But yes, the rock drake is a bit of a difficult tame, but once you've got one of these things, especially on Arboration, you're really not going to regret taming one. Next up, we have the Basilisk, and this really does have to be included on the list, and although its tame method is rubbish, and I really don't like this thing as a creature, and especially its tame method, that is the main rationale behind it, it is definitely still a very strong creature which is capable of huge amounts of damage. And if you do have the patience to tame one and the resources to gather it, which is rock drake eggs, wyvern eggs work as well, and you can use magmasaur eggs too. You'll probably be using rock drake eggs considering most people tame this thing on Arboration. Then you're definitely going to enjoy this creature, as it has a wealth of abilities like going into the ground, dealing torpor with its second ability, but also just dealing loads and loads of damage with its bite. And this creature really is built to pack a punch when it comes to the damage department, so it obviously very much makes sense why this creature is on the list. In at number 7, we have the Thyla, and this creature is one of those creatures which you have to put on any strongest tames list. It really can't be discounted from this role. It has such a wealth of abilities, it is absolutely insane. Namely that this thing can climb trees, walls and vertical surfaces, all of that kind of jazz, you know. And also on top of that, which is a little bit sad in terms of ASA, it is actually really rubbish at traversing terrain now, because the terrain is so buggy, in its form that this thing just glitches everywhere. So maybe don't use this thing as much for all of that transport on ASA, as it really isn't doing too great at the moment, like some other creatures as well with that similar department. And we'll probably see that continuing on as other maps release and more creatures are added to the game, and then we'll see the true horror that is the ASA terrain system. But also, unlike many carnivores, this creature actually does have really great mobility and the bleed ability, which doesn't really make sense when you think about it, considering like it's literally ripping creatures apart with its teeth. But you know, this creature does deal the bleed ability, which is an insanely useful ability, which I personally think every carnivore should really have. But considering its use in Ark, it makes sense why everyone doesn't have it, because it is a very useful ability which only the most powerful of carnivores can really wield. And the creature in the number 1 spot has the bleed ability, of course, and you can't really put a creature which doesn't have the bleed ability in at the number 1 spot. But the Thyla is still definitely very deserving of the number 7 spot, because there are definitely some creatures out there, like the next one on the list, which are more powerful than it and do a better job than it, but it is still a really great tame of its day, considering how early this thing came out, and it still is a really great, strong tame to this day, and again, very deserving of this spot. Next up, we have the Shadowmane, and this creature is one of those tames which I have to put on the list for strongest tames. Its amount of abilities is absolutely insane, and it is tremendous how many great abilities this creature has, and it really can't be discounted. Namely, it has a really great mobility, although I shouldn't really talk about that considering it is a strongest tames list. But in terms of its damage, it does have that pack buff. I'm not sure if it has the bleed ability, but it can charge up its damage over time, which isn't actually a very long period. After it deals enough damage, it can charge up its attack and deal insane amounts of damage, and these are really great creatures to use for bosses. And if you wanted to, you could use them for the Moda. I've tried it once. It actually didn't go as bad as you may think, especially considering that hydration buff which they have. And they're really great swimmers as well, which definitely does play to their advantage in mobility. But in terms of damage, these things really do pack a punch and are great creatures for bosses if you just want to give them a shot. In at the number 5 spot, we have the Giga, and it really wouldn't be a strongest Ark Tames list without this creature being here. It is just one of those tames which has to be put on this list for obvious reasons. It is a big, hunking carnivore capable of so much stuff, and especially in the damage department. This is one of the highest damage dealing dinos in the game. Its base damage once tamed is absolutely insane, and when wild is even more insane, because these things do significantly debuff when tamed, which doesn't really make sense, but considering the time when it came out, it kind of had to be done, as then it would have been way too OP for this job. And now there are some other creatures which are definitely more powerful than it. That's why it's only in at the number 5 spot. But still, considering when it came out in its day, it is still really held up to the test of time. And it is a great creature for dealing insane amounts of damage. And it really does pack a punch. Its only real downsides being its rubbish stamina, and also its, not bleed ability, rage meter, which means it only really has a set amount of health, and leveling up its health isn't really going to do much, apart from obviously the percentage difference will change. Either way, its health is quite limited, as after a certain amount of health is gone, it will simply lose control. Next up, we have the Carcharodontosaurus, and this creature is pretty much the same thing as the Giga, although just with a few upgrades, and it is a newer creature. So what really do you expect from this thing? And it is definitely one of those creatures which I say has to be on the list of strongest Ark Tames, no matter who it's coming from, what type of player, or what creatures they use. Because I don't really use this creature that much, it is still a very strong Ark Tame, and obviously has to be on this list. Its main advantages over the Giga, and why it is higher than the Giga, is the fact that it doesn't have a rage meter, and its rage meter, not rage meter, I'm getting caught up on everything. It's like, oh, I can't remember what it's Blood Rage. Sorry, I'm getting caught up on all kinds of Ark abilities. Once that is full, it deals more damage than the Giga, and considering it's in combat for a lot of the time, that meter, I don't know why I was going to say beta there, is going to be really, really full most of the time when you're in heated combat. So you're going to be dealing insane amounts of damage, and with no rage meter, you have the whole spectrum of health the Carcharodontosaurus has. It's a really tough dinosaur name to say, and also on top of that as well, it does have great mobility, which I haven't really talked about, and I'm pretty sure it does attack a little bit faster than the Giga as well, allowing a little bit more DPS, as we could all do with just a little bit more of that. In at number 3, we have the Rhyniognatha, and this creature really is one to be highly respected by any Ark player, with no exceptions. And yes, this is one of the newer tames that has been added to Ark. The fact that it can pick up a Rex, which no other Ark creature can do, is an insane thing to have. And yes, cryopods exist, so you know you can quite easily transport creatures larger than a Rex. It still does really stand a point. And in terms of PvP at the moment, these things are being heavily used, and it was actually a very controversial position for wildcard to put these things into ASA from day one, especially considering they increased the spawn rate by a lot. And the reason for that is these creatures are so strong, and people just wanted a more kind of primitive version of Ark, which, you know, we kind of all do want to go back to someday, and we hope Ark 2 is that, but I'm not actually sure it will be, because it may just end up like the first one. And I know wildcard says no, that is not going to happen, but we don't actually really know, and wildcard is in a little bit of a weird state at the moment, considering snail game stuff. It's not in a great position. But if you do want to know to tame one of these things, get a pheromone gland from the male, tame yourself a Bronto. Bronto is definitely preferred. Get those resources, which were on screen. Then find yourself a female Rhyniognatha, trap it in some way. The net gun is preferred. Get out your spyglass, or you can obviously use a magnifying glass. Damage this creature as much as you can, and you may think you're taking it too far. Just do it as much as you can. Obviously, don't kill it. That would be a huge waste, but still, really get its health down while it's in that trap. And for your net gun, obviously, it's time limited, but you still got a whole minute to do it, so it really isn't that bad. And after that, you want to feed your pheromone gland to your creature, obviously before you've let the creature out of the trap, otherwise this stage may not work. Actually, it just won't, really. It won't do the thing it's supposed to. Then after that, this thing will come out of its trap and then impregnate your dino, where all of the hunger timers or craving timers, that's I think what they're called, will happen, where you'll need all those resources, only necessary to get 100% effectiveness. Then your dino will roll over, die, and you have yourself a baby Rhyniognatha. In at number 2 is the Reaper, and the Reaper really did. I don't know what I'm turning into. Do you know what milk duds are? Maybe I'm turning into one of those things. Either way, if you didn't know already, the Reaper is one of the most powerful and strong tames which you'll find in any Ark playthrough, and the tame method is pretty similar to the Rhyniognatha, so I won't go through it. But instead of your dino being impregnated and hunger timers not existing on this thing, you'll need XP to get 100% effectiveness. Yeah, there's no difference in the taming method at all, really. There just isn't one. They're pretty much just a rehashing, although obviously this creature did come first all the way back in 2017, so you know, I guess it is 6 years older than the Rhyniognatha, and I do realise it's been absolutely ages since Operation came out. I remember when that map was new. Either way, in terms of this thing's abilities, it doesn't really have an ability apart from its insane damage, and I think its second attack deals torpor. It's also really great mobility and just overall great ergonomics as a creature, and wildcard really couldn't have designed this creature any better. It is just so good at its job in every way. If it was allowed into boss arenas, then bosses would be some of the easiest creatures in the game, so it really does deserve to be in this spot. And in at number 1 is the Deinonychus. And what really did you expect? Actually, you may have expected a very different creature to be in this list, but I think I have a very valid reason to put this thing in. Firstly, its taming method being one of the easiest in the game makes this one of the best creatures, if not the best creature, for strength to taming method difficulty ratio, whereas the Reaper is a very, very long and somewhat annoying process. Unless you're on Gen 2, then it is dead easy. And also the fact that this thing has a wealth of great abilities, namely its bleed ability, and the fact that it can inflict that on bosses as it is allowed into boss arenas, and it can inflict that bleed damage is insane, especially paired with its pack buff as well. You can have a group of these things going ham on any boss, and no creature will do better at that job. These are the best for it, unless you're on Extinction, obviously. Then some other creatures are going to be in order. The Carcharodontosaurus and the Giga are definitely going to be needed for that, as albeit they are really, really powerful tames. The health can't quite rack up to some of the Titans, but it isn't going to be the bosses which you're facing in most cases. And for everything else, these things are going to do splendidly for everything, and the mobility is really great as well. So if you do get into any trouble in a fight, you can quickly dash away with nice parkour skills, which, you know, isn't quite as elegant as some other Ark creatures, but still extremely useful. So I do urge you, if you get the chance, really, really do tame one of these things. And in my opinion, they're the strongest Ark creatures. In at number 10, we've got the Crystal Wyvern, and you could say just the regular Wyvern as well. It's just I kind of have a preference for Crystal Wyverns, so I'm just going to put them on the list instead of the normal Wyverns. But, you know, if you don't really like the Crystal Wyverns for whatever reason, then normal Wyverns it is. And actually, it is a very well-known fact that Wyverns are pretty much the fastest land flyers out there. These things have insane agility when it comes to actual just flying, gliding not included, even though there are obviously a lot of gliders in this list, and that does count as a more speedy tame. But in the sake of just flying around, these things are actually pretty speedy when it comes to it, for obviously that main flying. They're faster than the Pteranodon and a Tapejara, of course, and way, way faster than something like the Quetzal. That is an insanely slow creature. And even though you can't level up movement speed anymore for flyers without obviously enabling flyer speed leveling, or with the classic flyers mod, obviously those two options accessible on single player only unless you're a host of a server, these things are still going to offer a great amount of speed, and you're really not going to be worrying about the speed of these things, considering that they are definitely some really fast tames, and considering how easy the Crystal Wyverns are, they are a really great option for your first flyer on Crystal Isles. Next up, we've got the Rhyniognatha, and this is definitely one of the newer flyers which has been added into Ark, but it definitely does need to be put on this list for many, many reasons, namely because of the speed. Actually, there's not really many reasons. It's speedy. That is how the Rhyniognatha works. And if you didn't know already, it spawns on the island and the Lost Island. They're your only two maps and your only options. On ASA as well, just as a little bonus, they are nowhere near as rare to find, unless obviously you're playing on the normal version of Ark. Then, well, I can't really say normal, they're both normal, but the old version of Ark has a much rarer Rhyniognatha spawn than the new one, and actually it seems a bit like an overspawn for the new one. There just seems to be Rhyniogathas everywhere, but you can always raise your dino count, use the destroy wild dinos command if you want to tame yourself a Rhyniognatha on the older version of Ark, and you're on a single player world and you have access to those commands, of course. But how do you actually tame one of these things as well? And this is the only creature on this list which I'm really going to talk about its tame method in great detail, because it's quite a difficult one. In terms of what you do, you kill a male Rhyniognatha to get that pheromone, then tame yourself a Bronto or equivalent creatures that work. Bronto's the best. Get all those resources on screen, not necessary of course, only optional. You only need them if you want 100% effectiveness, and for these things I don't really think it matters all too much. Then you'll want to trap your Rhyniognatha and damage it as much as you can. Obviously, don't kill it, that would be absolutely awful and a huge waste of time in actually trapping the creature and just the creature itself, especially on the old version of Ark, considering how rare these things actually are on that version of the game. and you may need to give it some additional hits as well, because these things do actually heal ridiculously quick. Then you want to feed that pheromone gland to whatever creature you're doing, and then this is the time when you want to get out all of those craving resources and have them ready in your inventory, as your creature is going to need them during the process, which is just about to happen after this, which is where your dino is impregnated by the Rhyniognatha. That's when the cravings will happen. Afterwards it will roll over and your creature will die, which, you know, could be a little bit sad. Don't bring the most important one, and then out comes a baby Rhyniognatha. Now the Griffin is making an appearance on the list, and for good reason, mainly because of that gliding ability, being a prime choice for doing any kind of wyvern trench raids on Ragnarok and other maps where these things spawn, which also wyverns spawn on. And Valguero is no, I don't know actually. Valguero does have the Griffin trench, but either way, especially on Ragnarok, I should have just stuck to that example. These creatures are very widely used for those wyvern trench runs, and for good reason, considering their insane gliding speed. And this does have a bit of movement speed on it, by the way. This isn't the actual speed, but this is the early days of B-roll, and this is actually the first piece of B-roll which I ever recorded for the channel, and it's still kicking around today. Actually, there's a nice little memory of when I started doing the top 10s, and there's actually audio attached to this as well, but obviously that has been muted as I'm talking over it with me now, because me about 6 months ago, for some reason I'm ridiculously slow at talking. But also, on top of the Griffin's insane speed, don't know why that's so hard to say, these things are also really great at dealing damage as well, and that glide ability can also inflict damage onto the creatures as well. If you dive bomb them, I think that's what it's called, and you'll see it being used here, and it is actually a pretty useful tactic and a very unpredictable one if you're going up some players in Ark, which, you know, may be somewhat predictable if people know the Griffin, but you can definitely be very sneaky with those glide attacks, and again, very, very great for doing any kind of wyvern trench runs. You can get quickly in there and quickly out with no trouble whatsoever. In at number 7, we have the Managarmr, and this creature definitely does have to be put on the speedy tames list, and I think for this creature being a speedy tame, it definitely does make sense. Like, this creature can absolutely zip across the map, although it does have a slight kind of learning curve to it, so I'm not actually going to put it as high as maybe it could have ranked. And also, I don't know, I'm not really kind of into this creature as much as some of the other creatures, and I don't think that as useful of a speedy creature, which is why some creatures like the Gallimimus I'm just not going to put on this list, partly because there are definitely some faster creatures out there, but I don't really enjoy using them, and the Managarmr is kind of one of those, and considering its bugginess as well, I don't think it is the fastest when you really take everything into comparison, although it definitely is a very speedy tame and worthy of this list. You just might say the creature after it and the one after that is just a little bit slower than it, and maybe you could say that, but over longer distances those creatures are going to hold up a lot better than this thing. This is definitely more of a short burst distancing creature, but also with their freeze ability they are definitely very useful, not just for speed but also for freezing things, which is a surprisingly OP ability actually, considering how long these things freeze other creatures for. The only thing to watch out for is the bugs. Next up we've got the Snow Owl, and this is one of the most revolutionary flyers out there in my opinion, and it is so widely used by every Ark player that has ever set eyes on one of these creatures, and I'm pretty sure they're available on Fjorda as well, not just on Extinction, so you can dig into these creatures even more if you are on any of those maps. Of course, Extinction and Fjorda I think are the only two maps where these things spawn. The reason why I'm mentioning that is Extinction is a paid DLC map and Fjorda is a free one, so it is a lot more accessible, and I know a lot of you down there who watch these videos do actually play Fjorda, so, you know, it kind of makes sense why I'd mention that. But obviously their main speed does come from that gliding ability, which is very similar to the Griffins, but it always just seems faster and with a lot more agility than the Griffin. And there's kind of a tier list to it, as the next creature is a glider, the next one after that as well is a glider, but with even more speed, and even the creature which is in at number 1 is a glider as well. So there's definitely something to be said for this method of travel. And as well, they do have a sort of heat-seeking ability to spy out any people who might be trying to raid your base in a PvP scenario, or any creatures which may be missing in a PvE one. You also want to level up that stamina so you can heal these creatures up so quickly, as obviously that is something which is going to be essential in any kind of boss fight or battle, obviously, because you're going to want to heal up those creatures quickly and efficiently, and you can do it somewhat more efficiently than the Daedon, and especially on Extinction you can actually keep that creature alive, as the Daedon really isn't going to rack up against any of the Titans. But it's also useful if you're taming a creature and its health is really low. Then if it's wild, obviously it's not yours, you can't heal it with the Daedon, but you can heal it with a Snow Owl, which is just a nice little thing as well. And with their pellets on top of that too, these things can gather insane loot out of any kind of gacha, which is definitely something to be said, and something which is a very nice thing to have, which no other Ark creature can offer. And if you do have Extinction or Fjorda, definitely go for the Snow Owl. In at number 5 is the Desmodus, and this creature is yet again another glider along the glider tier list, as this one feels even more fast than the Snow Owl, and with even more agility and some nicer abilities to go on top of that as well. Although the speed is the main thing which we're going to be talking about here, again with that gliding ability, and the fact that the stamina drain is also very minimal as well. Like the Snow Owl, it definitely does benefit these creatures hugely, and I do really enjoy the speed which you can get out of a creature like this. And also the gliding doesn't seem too far off primitiveness, which is always a nice thing to have in Ark, because I don't particularly like all the techie creatures, although the creature in at number 2 is a kind of techie one, but still I kind of prefer the primitiveness of this creature and the kind of Nordicness of it as well, considering that Fjorda is a very Nordic map. It's a nice quality for this creature to have, and again with that glide ability you can get some serious speed out of these things. Next up we've got the Rock Drake, and yet again another glider, this time packing a lot of punch in terms of the damage department. You should really look at this thing. It deals so much damage in terms of actually, like, its damage to size ratio and damage to speed ratio is frankly stupid in terms of actually just how powerful this creature is. But it really does make it a very useful one, and although not the greatest on maps that aren't Arboretion, it definitely has to be said to be a fast creature, and definitely one of the faster ones in the game, obviously being even above the top 5 in this list that we've got here today, which obviously mean it must be fast. I'm not giving you the best example here considering I'm in quite flat terrain, but their stamina drain is pretty low, so when these things are actually in some proper serious action, they can glide for a long while. And also on top of that, they can grab onto any kind of walls, and also they can kind of zoom onto walls as well, as long as they are close enough to them. And obviously when your HUD is enabled, which it isn't here just for the sake of the b-roll, you'll get a little crosshair on your screen when obviously you can grapple on to those rock faces. So it's not like you just have to spam click buttons and then as soon as you get close enough, there you go, you can now click on it, but you don't really know when you're close enough. No, it is quite obvious to tell because of that marker. Just for the sake of the b-roll, I've turned the HUD off, so obviously that isn't there, although it is pretty easy to judge with your eyes as well. Just, you know, a little bit of assistance is nice. And if you haven't already, definitely go and tame yourself the Rock Drake. You'll have an absolute blast with this thing. In at number 3 is the Bloodstalker, the living Spider-Man. This creature definitely is one when it comes to any form of agility, and it really can't be backed down for that skill. And it is one which actually hardly any other, if not any other, spider in Ark possesses, as the Rhynio is one of the most downright useless creatures out there. but it is also really quick and agile on the surface of the water and under the water too, which can't be said to some other creatures on this list, and it definitely is one of the more versatile ones, being used for a wide range of things. And I actually use it mainly underwater, as it is a really viable underwater tame. But obviously with this really fast grappling, it makes it one of the fastest creatures out there, as it can really quickly zip between any kind of tool object, and it can't just grapple onto trees, it can grapple onto many other things as well. And the range of the limit on what it can grapple to is absolutely insane as well. It's not like you can only grapple onto things which are really close to you. It's probably at least maybe 50 to 100 meters, which is actually a substantial amount, and it could even be more than that. I haven't really measured any of it. And there is a huge benefit to this as well, as you get yourself a really great agile travel mount. But also on Gen 1 there are missions which you'll benefit from for having faster Bloodstalker flying skills. The alpha one of which I have done, as well as the gamma and the beta ones too, but the alpha one obviously does offer the most hexagons, and those are an extremely useful virtual resource on an already virtual game. But you know, doubly virtual, very useful on Gen 1. In at number 2 is the Astrodelphus, but also the Rhyniognatha. I'm just going to shoehorn them both in together, as they kind of move in the exact same way, although the Astrodelphus is the kind of main one here. But Rhyniognatha I'm going to put as a little honorable mention, as it is an extremely fast tame as well. And you know, it didn't really make the list in terms of what the B-roll says, but I'm saying it also goes here too. They kind of go hand in hand with each other, as they use a fuel which adds to their saddle, and then they can travel at absolutely insane speeds across the map. And it really doesn't seem like it may be traveling this fast at this time, but considering that these things fly consistently and they only stop when they run out of fuel, it's insane over long distances, and it really is a very viable one. And considering with the Rhyniognatha it can gain speed as it points further down, it does have a huge benefit as well, and so can the Astrodelphus increase its speed as well. And on top of that, fire all kinds of lasers like the Rhyniognatha with all kinds of grenades, and these really are fighting machines of the air, and they have to be pretty much the fastest out there in the game, obviously only beaten by the creature in at number 1. But what actually is that creature? In at number 1 just had to be the Maewing. This creature is one of the fastest, if not the fastest creature in the game, and it kind of has to be, considering I'm putting it in at the number 1 spot. Sorry Syntac, the galley just simply doesn't make the cut. But either way, in terms of this thing, it is probably the most efficient glider out there, and with also the fact that its saddle is unlocked at level 19, it really does have something to be said that you can have this so early on in the game, and it is the best travel mount out there in my opinion, and actually the fastest travel mount really out there in my opinion. And you may be able to get a creature which can go faster for a short amount of time, but over long distances these creatures are going to be your biggest friend, with absolutely insane traveling speeds, obviously increasing as you shoot further down like the Rhyniognatha and the Astrodelphus, but I think this is even faster than all of those, and I really do credit its speed, especially considering the level it is unlocked at. And also it does act as a feeding trough as well, which is just a nice little ability to have, and actually it doesn't really do that bad on same elevation terrain, which some other gliders really do struggle with. And obviously it can gather berries too, which is just a nice little bonus which I think we all really need to appreciate. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you all enjoyed this one, as I did really enjoy making it. And as always, comment down below what is the fastest Ark creature in your opinion, and I'll see you all later.